Hello and welcome back to GFW Acquires, where we're going to be breaking down the actions that are required to buy, sell, and scale your business through acquisition. So today we're going to be doing another case study breakdown. If you guys see me looking up, it's because I have it plugged into my monitor here, as you might be able to tell by the way it's presented on your screen. But today we're just going to break down how you're going to buy a $1.2 million commercial cleaning business using 0% APR credit card. So let's get right into this presentation. So I hope you guys are doing well today. I'm looking forward to hopefully breaking down a concept that works for you. Again, this is not financial advice. These are real examples. However, reference all the disclaimers down below in the description. Okay. I don't claim to be anything that I'm not, and this is not financial advice. Do your own due diligence in your process and understand that this is a way, but it's not the only way. And that's my purpose behind showing you guys breaking down these different case studies. So let's look at this example here. So we have a company that's based out in Polk County, Florida, and it's a commercial cleaning business which is doing $1 million per year in gross revenue, and the SDE is 375. So what do I like to do? I like to call it my FOA, right? Basically, it's asking your 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, and how. So here are the financials. What are the financials looking like? The asking price is $1.2 million. Revenue is $1 million. We're looking at EBITDA because with SDE, that includes that seller discretionary earnings. So that includes what what's the word I'm looking for? Salary for the owner in this case. Or you can just look at that as what would you pay for a manager to take over this position, which is a manager's salary of about $75,000, which is then extracted, thus putting it at a 4 multiple. If we're asking for that, I feel like that's too high. Typical range is 2.5 to 3.5. We'll break this down a little bit later. Operations, they have 18 employees, including a field manager, and the current owner only works 4 hours per week, meaning that it is a good absentee owner sort of business that can be facilitated, especially if you bring in someone else or progress one of these already existing employees into a new role. Assets, right now they have an inventory of $10,000, and they have furniture, fixtures, and equipment, or known as FF&E, valued around $25,000. So this is going to be tools and things of that nature that they're using to get these commercial jobs done. Lastly, opportunities. Anytime you're looking at a business, you want to ask yourself, is there opportunity in the market, and what opportunities are looking for long term? So furthermore, you also want to look at what already exists that you can change. So one of the first things is they're providing services out of house right now. So they're paying some other company or companies $75,000 to handle certain services that they already don't offer within that. We can bring that in-house instead of outsourcing that, which would then help to raise that bottom line. And furthermore, some different ways you can grow this business is by looking at the market rates and bringing those up. Typically when you're buying a business, especially from someone who is in their 60s or so, they're very community oriented. They're not so much worried about the dollars, so they might not be at market rates, which can be a plus and a minus. If you're buying this business, there's an instant value add by bringing the market rates up. You can change the clientele that you're targeting. We're not sure all the way. We have an idea who they service, but let's just say that the current client that they're servicing isn't paying, a yearly contract worth $200,000-$300,000. Instead, they're paying $5,000 per month, so maybe $60K contract, whatever it looks like. And furthermore, bringing in government contracts, guaranteeing more money, changing the type of clientele again, and also creating stability within that business. So let's give a little seller backstory. So we're going to omit the actual seller's name. We're just going to call him Tim. Tim is 64. He's been in this business for the last 12 years, and he's had a 25-year career in corporate facilities management, which shows you the parallels as well as the movement that he may have taken, which made sense for him to go ahead and work on commercial cleaning and facilities like that. They're originally from Tampa. He saw Polk County had an explosive population and the business growth as an opportunity to carve out a good niche in the commercial cleaning services. With a hands-on approach in early years, he grew up from just him to 18 crew members, servicing schools, offices, as well as multi-tenant properties. He's steady, deal-oriented operator, so he has more of an engineer's mindset. That's really important, more than a marketer. And he prides himself on building reliable systems, which is why you buy companies. You buy companies for their systems. He's not flashy. He doesn't chase trends. He's maintained a business, stable revenue, and steady margins for over a decade, because he focuses on consistency and customer trust, which is also great signs. Now, moving forward more, he's proud of having built a company that runs without him, but he's ready to retire. and his wife been talking about traveling the Southeast in an RV and visiting their grandkids, which sounds like a great time. He's offering 1 month of training to ensure that transition looks good, as well as client introductions. So that way the top clients understand who is now in the driver's seat, which would be you. Okay, he wants to hand the reins to someone that's younger, growth-minded, and wants to capture that market potential. In addition, he feels that the business has room for growth, but he's just not that guy. He's ready for his next stage, which is exactly why a lot of these people in the silver tsunami that we keep discussing are great fits for a younger, later 20, 30-year-old, late 20s into your 30s, and even into your 40s. There's no limit on when you can do this. But a lot of times they're looking for people in that range because that means that we have the energy and wherewithal to continue growing that business. Now, next step. In short, he's 64, practical, steady hands. He wants to retire and travel with his wife. He's going to be giving 1 month of training as well as client introductions. And this is huge. Client introductions are super, super important to make sure that that business maintains that stability. And he wants to see that company continue to thrive in that community, which is something I hope you as a buyer are hoping to do as well. If you happen to be like Tim, out there looking to get rid of your business, transition to the next phase, please reach out to me and my team. We have a form down below in the description, as well as our email here for you to email us at. And you can get in hold of me and my team, and we can figure out what we can do to help you sell your business and transition to that next stage of your life. Now, back to the video. So I wanted to go through a couple of things that I look at too when we're breaking down the flow. All right. So operations, where are the opportunities for improvement in operations? We're going to look at new SOPs. We want to make sure that the clients are not dependent on the owner's involvement, right? It's not required for him to be there. Since he works 4 hours a week, that indicates that the business doesn't necessarily need to run with him, which means it's a great absentee opportunity. Workforce strength, we want to make sure that the staff is stable, that they enjoy their job, and that there's any improvements we can make to help them become better. That's going to be important. Supply chain. So knowing if we have reliable vendors, make sure there's not too much cost variability, and as well as timing to receive equipment and things of that nature. Tech systems. A lot of times these companies are running underneath the proper tech stack. So you going in immediately being able to use different ERPs and CRMs are going to allow you to recapture past clients and bring them back in-house and offer upsell services and cross-sell services. Making sure that there's a lot of regulatory compliance. Are there any OSHA or labor licensing issues? Those are things you want to check, especially when you're working with a company like this. And lastly, in this bucket, we want to make sure there is client concentration, that it doesn't rely only on 1 or 2 heavily funding clients. Meaning, if this company is doing $1 million a year in revenue, we don't want to see that 1 or 2 of those clients make up 60 or 70% of that income, because what happens if that client decides to do something else, especially on this transition, right? We want to make sure to focus on that. Now, looking at opportunities when it comes for assets, we want to see if they have tangible equipment, technology, real estate, things that have depreciation schedules. Meaning what? Meaning that if we find good equipment, we're able to liquidate and maybe upgrade equipment, refinance different vehicles and technology. And if we have real estate, we can actually leverage, and I'm not doing it in this example, but for example, you can leverage the real estate that a company has in addition to the value of the business itself, and use that to finance the deal with little or no money out of pocket. I believe it's called land easement. There's different opportunities for things like that. So, or buybacks, things of that nature. I'll break that down in different series, but off the top of my head, that's something that came to mind. I want to look at intangible assets, right? So the company's been around for 12 years. That means it probably has decent brand equity and a decent reputation within that community. So for instance, like a Coca-Cola that would have all these little different sub companies underneath it. We want to make sure that when you see Coca-Cola, you know it's stamped. So it means all these other things are, for instance, going to be good. Going back to assets, looking at things like this, digital assets. Are they having website traffic, SEO, or social media following? And a really big one that a lot of younger guys miss is email lists, right? Especially if you're buying a company that has been long lasting since, say, in this case, 2013, right? That means a lot of the clients were coming and on board over that time before they transitioned to using modern social media and technology and apps like that, right? Meaning there's probably a lot of opportunity in that email list for people that have already worked with that company to then be upsold or cross-sold, or get a new contract in terms of like a long service deal that you guys can work them with. Also, like I said, you want to double check on those contracts, right? You want to make sure there's active client contracts, that there's some good time on those. You want to make sure there's good vendor agreements, and you also like the lease terms for the building and the different items that you're working with. There's always, everything is negotiable, okay? Just remember that everything's negotiable. You can change the rates, you can get creative and do different types of deals. Hence why we're able to do deals like this with 0% interest credit cards. Furthermore, you want to check for accounts receivable and payable, so the age of the receivables, and make sure that the clients are reliable payers. Hidden liabilities such as debt obligations, you want to make sure that the financing that's already been in place for the business, that you're not buying a business that has, $500,000 in debt again before you even get, to purchasing the company. You want to make sure that the books make sense. And this is something that you want to go and seek. There's business attorneys, there's business CPAs. Specifically, our team has a couple we're a hold of that you can also work on, which is huge. Right? Want to make sure that everything's up to date when it comes to licenses, especially if you're looking at doing different government contracts and specialized work, right? So if, for instance, there are commercial cleaning opportunities in your local government, you want to make sure that you have the best licensing and certifications that applies to you, that can give you the best opportunity of winning those contracts. When it comes to looking at opportunities, we talked about this a little bit earlier, so I'll go through this one quickly. So we have upsells and cross sells. So boom. Are there existing clients who can buy more of what we already have? That's a big one we talked about, hence that email list. Pricing, right? Are we adjusted to match the market rates? And if we're exceeding it, are we doing something that relates to demand? Is that an indicator? Digital marketing leverage. Okay, are we using paid ads or using organic growth through social media? M&A synergies, right? Is there potential to acquire another company in that region to make our business bigger and better? Market expansion, right? Are we looking at new geographical areas? Are we trying to look outside of Polk County, right? Are we looking into different regions? Furthermore, are we looking at different industries that are maybe underserved in this sort of service that we can provide? And lastly, we want to make sure we're diversify our clientele, like I mentioned, and we identify any areas that we're outsourcing and aim to bring that in-house, likely through an acquisition. Polk County, just as a reminder, we're going to go a little bit more into deep. We're about to get straight to the numbers. So Polk County has a national top 5 population growth. This is back in 2023. And the global cleaning industry is expected to grow 4.5 within the U.S. market alone, 3.1% over the next 5 years, meaning there's going to be opportunities. And lastly, there's a lot of local procurement paths for state, local, and federal at this junction. So as a quick overview, the strengths that they have is they're established over 10 years. They have good relationships. They have core teams and processes. They might be small, but they have 18 loyal employees, including that field manager. They have reliable vendor networks. So since they've been around for a while, they likely have good long-term supplier agreements that keeps the material costs predictable. And this is something that can also be renegotiated once you take over and transition. They have great brand recognition because they're a local name and they've been around. They have consistent EBITDA. So over the last, in this example, we'll say the last 3 years. But they have consistent income showing profitability despite limited reinvestment in the growth, meaning that there is value add, okay? Their gaps. They might not be at market rates. They likely don't have much online social media presence, because if you're on social media and you're running a business like this, you should usually be at $2-3 million a year. No questions asked. Operational technology, they might still be relying heavily on manual writing and invoice, and I imagine so, because that's commonly what's seen in these type of cases. The owner wears too many hats. If he's still working 4-hour weeks, there shouldn't be a reason for him to be working on the business at all. That should be easily transitioned over to a different employee, and the rates can be adjusted for such. And making sure that there's a good diversification of clients. It seems that they're concentrated in certain areas, and we want to be able to move this business into the next level, meaning that we got to get creative. Can we try to submit contracts and get deals with arenas and small facilities like that, community centers, things of that nature? We need to start looking at different opportunities like that. So now that we've taken a good overlook of the different types of opportunities and things that exist within this business, how do we buy this and how are we going to grow this business? Let's start where we need to start. We're starting from EBITDA, right? So $300K. So all incremental dollars that flow directly EBITDA are not SED, and this is how we're going to break everything down. So we're going to leverage seller financing. Meaning we're going to go talk to the seller and negotiate a deal with them to say, hey, we want to leverage the income of this business and basically use you as the loan instead of a bank. We want to use private money through you, and then we're going to use the 0% credit cards to go ahead and provide the rest of the capital. And this can be done, so the 0% interest cards can be you. And if this is something that you need, we're able to facilitate this and help you get $75, $50, $100,000 toward your own capital to put toward acquiring a deal. But furthermore, this is something you can also have an investor do. So kind of looking at the market, we understand that we have room to renegotiate. Why is this? Because average janitorial businesses, right, something like this, sell for a multiple of 2.2, meaning that the seller is overpricing the business. And we need to be able to get it at a price that makes sense for us, but also helps them, get what their goal looks like. So that being said, we're going to look at renegotiating this deal. So after we've spoken with them, we're able to get this purchase price down to $1 million because they want to be fair and reasonable. And in some cases, like I said, your miles may vary. It's going to depend on the person you're working with. Some of these people will have no problem coming down on the purchase price and do a seller financing like we did here. There's going to be people that are stern on that 1.2, but are willing to seller finance the deal a lot more because of that. And there's going to be cases in which they're not willing to seller finance, but they're willing to bring that price down. So it just depends on who you're working with. Like I said, this is a way, but this is not the way, right? Everything depends on the person. There are millions of business for sale in America. So the type of person you're going to deal with is going to, who knows, but this is a way you can do it. And again, this is not financial advice. It's just an example here. So purchase price of $1 million. We're going to be using seller finance. We convinced them to be able to do $925,000, carrying that as a seller note. We're going to bring in an investor, or in this case, we can just say it might be yourself, but we're going to say an investor, so you're out of pocket $0, right? We're able to work with somebody who got $75,000 that was funded via credit cards in their name, and there's no bank financing. Now, you might be asking, how did this person get that $75,000, or how could I get that $75,000? Well, you're in luck. So we operate, Canally Capital operates in the private credit space, meaning that we help provide capital in all sorts of deals in different ranges for companies that are not, dealing with securities. I believe it's labeled as a Schedule 12. Anyhow, we're able to help you or a potential investor with great credit or decent credit even qualify for $50,000 to $100,000 worth of 0% interest credit cards. There's more information down below in the description. Here's our team's email that you can reach out to. Let's continue to go back to the video. All right, so let's break down the numbers, and this is something that you guys are going to want to know. When you're trying to create your opportunity when it comes to putting together the financial stack, the capital stack, you want to know that there's opportunity for growth in this business to justify either that purchase price or the investment that you make. Now, looking at this, you could justify a higher purchase price if it came down to it. So what we're going to do here is look at different ways that I decided could be great for growing this business. So one thing we can do, we talked about market rates. Let's say that 70% of the revenue, 700,000 of that million, and we apply a 7% average price lift with a 90% retention, right? Meaning that of the clients that we have right now, we're able to maintain 90% of them as we increase this by 7%. That incremental revenue changes the business from 44,000 a year to an additional 11 to 13,000 EBITDA lift. So assuming a 25-30% incremental margin, right? So that means like what we're making on top of it, what's left, right? So this adds an additional 11 to 13,000. Again, the number's going to vary, but this is kind of giving us an idea of what's possible. When we go over here to higher end clients, like I said, we can change the type of people we're doing business with. So what if we moved our deals to a standard 200K on certain types of Class A buildings and medical facilities, right, that we might not be touching so much? Let's say our standard margin right now when we work on these deals is only 20,000. As we transition and work with higher end buildings, we're able to move that number up to 30%. So that's a 10% gain margin on 200,000, adding an additional 20,000 in EBITDA uplift. Furthermore, let's say we get some government contracting, right? Let's say we secure a $250,000 government contract, which is fairly common. If you're looking to get into government contracts, I do have a specialist that has won over $5 million worth of government contracts in the last few years. So this is something that you and your business might need as well. This is something we definitely have expertise in-house on. But continuing this example, you continue and you secure that $250,000 government contract, right, with a 22 to 25% margin, which is pretty standard, and wage benefits priced in. That adds an additional $55,000 to $62,000 of EBITDA for that year. Lastly, bringing that $75,000 worth of specialty services in-house. So we're currently outsourcing 12% of that money. When we bring it in-house, that helps us increase our margin by 28% to 40%. That 28% margin gain equals 75,000, which is around 21,000 in EBITDA lift. So this is how it looks. Here's the growth lever: pricing lift, government contract, higher end mix, and especially in-house services, right? When we do that price lift on the pricing and bring it to market rates, we add an extra 12K. Government contracts brings us an extra 60,000. Hiring clients brings us an extra 20,000 on that year, as well as in-house services brings us an additional 21%. Again, these numbers are based on the percentage margin that comes from that lift of changing those deals. So that total lift adds an extra $113,000 to the EBITDA, right? So after about 12 to 24 months executing that creates value add. So if we were able to change this to here, right, what does that do? That means that we increase our multiple when we go to resell this business. At that moment, we create value, 3 to 3.5x the multiple. So that means that the business now would be worth that 1.2 to 1.45 million, giving you an additional $240,000 to $450,000 of equity back from that $1 million purchase price, which could be used to pay off any sort of debt servicing that is coming when you go to refinance this business. And typically you might refinance the business 3 to 5 years later, but this is a great thing to do, because when you do things like this and then you go back to the bank and say, hey, I want to refinance this loan, or at that stage you go to a bank to refinance, you get 80 to 90% of that money, and then you use that to repay your debts. And now you're walking away with you 100% ownership in that company and continuing to grow that company. So like I said right here, if you refinance and your initial capex for equipment or ramp up costs, boom. So here's how it breaks down. Now I'm sure you guys want to know the more detailed numbers, and hopefully this video is in a way where it's very thorough and logical for you guys to understand, but also to the point. That's my objective, and that's what I want to improve on in these videos. So continue forward right here. Seller note, we're going to assume an 8% over 10 years. Now, let's say that they won the 8% because you said, hey, I want to lower that purchase price, and I also want a seller finance. But they said, okay, but I want the interest rate to be this. Because a lot of times when you do seller finance, you can even get as low as 0%. There's a lot of deals that happen that way. You just have to find the right person. Sometimes you get deals at 3% interest, 5% interest, or the interest doesn't kick in for a whole year, and then it goes on that schedule. So there's a lot of different ways to structure that. Just want to give you guys food for thought. But in this example, we're going to go on a higher end because we got more of the price that we wanted, so we had to compromise somewhere, and that's where we compromised that interest. So that equals around $11,200 a month, and the annual debt service is around $134,000. So remember, we have $300,000. We have $300,000 in EBITDA, and what does that look like on a monthly basis? So $300,000. I'm pulling up on my calculator right here. Gives us 25,000. One second, guys. That gives us $25,000 a month and cash flow to work with. So once we take out this 11.2, we still have a good, what's that, 13.8 left. Which, reminder, everything is negotiable. You can do something where you say, hey, what if we gave you the first payment of 20,000 and we didn't, continue this schedule until 2-3 months later, whatever it is, right? It's a lot of different ways to structure that. Just food for thought. So now let's look at the opportunity where we have that 75,000. Let's say we brought an investor at that 75,000 and it went through us or our team. This could be you, so some of these numbers may vary. So the importance of getting that capital back directly as such might not be as pertinent if it's you. However, say you brought this investor in, you got them 75,000, which we can do on our team, and you're like, how are we going to pay this investor back, right? So there's 3 different structures. We can do preferred return, we can do hybrid cash flow, or we can do straight equity. Well, actually, this is incorrect. You guys are going to see right here. So preferred return structure, hybrid cash flow, as well as a convertible note. That's what we're looking at. So pure equity. Well, actually, okay. I goofed right there. So there's 3 different ways we're going to be able to repay this investor. We're going to either do it through pure equity, a convertible note, or preferred return and equity. So let's go back to the first 2. So structure A. The investor puts in $75,000 and they get 30% ownership. They cover their own credit card debt, but distributions are set up to help them. So this is how it would flow. You have $300,000 in EBITDA. We take that seller note out for the year, leaving us with $166,000 for the year. The investor gets their 30% of that distribution at $49.8K per year, which is around $4,000 some odd dollars a month. And this should cover their average cost for their credit cards, which would be around 1 to 2% per month once the interest period is over. So that would be around 1.8 to 2K per month. Meaning what? Meaning there's plenty of meat on the bone for them to satisfy that and still have money in their pocket on that deal. Now for you, you can negotiate this. They might push for a higher percentage, such as 30%, simply because they're coming out of pocket through that. But like I said, everything's negotiable, so you can convince them to say, hey, because you're coming in with this and I want to pay you back, I want to lower this percentage, things of that nature. And that's what we're going to see in the next examples, right? So over here, structure B, we can do a convertible note. What does this mean? This means that we're going to start it off as a loan and convert this into just equity, I believe, right? Yeah, convert this to equity. So that's how it would break down. The investor has that $75,000 as a loan with a 10% annual number that we give them, right? So we give them that loan at 10%, and we pay back that loan at 10%. So that's $7,500 a year, or roughly $625 per month. After 2 years, the investor chooses if they want to convert that 30% to equity or take repayment and refinance. So this is how that will look. $300,000 minus the seller note leaves us $166,000. Then what we do from there is the investor will receive $7,500 at that 10% interest per year, but it won't. Here's the downside though: it won't cover their credit cards fully if the APR jumps, which it will after that 12 months. The upside is it protects you by lowering the early payout. The downside is investor doesn't really get covered, right? And the reason I wanted to bring an example up like this is because what can happen when you're trying to get that first deal done, you might not have access and likely don't have access to much, but you might have someone that's in your circle that's willing to go in with you on this business, and you guys can convince the seller financing, but they have better credit. And what that means is they get access to capital. How you want to do this is you want to leverage the ability to get access to the capital to get this deal done. However, you're going to have to compromise somewhere. It's not going to maybe be your first home run hit immediately out the door, because you do have to grow and scale this business to leave money for this business to grow. But a lot of times, in the case I've worked with, you might find it to where you want to be reasonable, say, hey, I know we're both trying to get this thing going. I know that you're going to have a credit card bill that you're going to have to pay every single month. I don't want to see you end up in any sort of lawsuit or anything of that nature because of mispayment on these cards. This is how we're going to break down the deal. And this is a perfect example for structure C, the hybrid, right? This is the most ideal method that covers all that so everybody's happy. So let's say we up that 12%. You can also lower this. It's all up to you. The investor puts in that $75,000. These are going to be 0% cards, right? However, instead of getting 30%, we bring them down to 20% equity because they're getting 12% preferred return. So that's their pref. And when you have that, that means, hey, you can't have your cake and eat it too, but you can have a cupcake, which is kind of like the same thing. So what does that look like? 300K is going to be how much you have to work with. So 134 is a seller note. We have 166 left. The investor's preferred return is $9,000 per year, aka 12%, and we pay this out quarterly to keep the books clean. The investor's equity is 20%. So of that remaining, take out that $9,000 from them, leaves you with 157, meaning that they'll be receiving 31.4 per year. That can be paid out quarterly. Payment schedule, again, seek legal advice. This is not financial advice. So the total that investor receives at the end of the year is $40,400, which equates to about 3.3 per month, which means that their rough amount for the credit cards would be around $2,000. So that would be enough for them to cover that, and they would still walk away with an extra $1,300. So this is one way that you can set up the deal that makes it feasible for them to not only get money. Your main focus becomes, okay, hey, I'm giving you what you asked for, and then it's their responsibility to cover their debt. And a lot of times it just depends on who you're working with, because you can't have that person get that $75K, but you can also say, hey, I'm not responsible for your $75,000. That's on you. Here's what I can do. This is how we can set up this deal, and it's up to you to manage the rest of that. That is an instance that happens as well. It depends on what type of person you're working with. So what's the upside in this type of deal? The investor feels safe because they know they're going to get money back, and they're also going to be able to cover whatever bills come out of that. But the thing, and you give them less equity, which means that you have more upside come time for a sale or refinance. Downside is you are committing to their preferred payments, and that could kind of harm you that first year when you get in this business running. So like I said, it's about kind of figuring out what deal makes sense for you. So how does this number look like totally? Okay, so boom, cash available after debt service, you have 300,000. We have a $925,000 at 8% loan, which breaks down to about $1,200 a month. Investor contributions is $75,000, so we're able to get that full $1 million into the deal. We give them 20% of the remaining distributable profit and a 12% return per year. If this was my deal, I'll give them 20% and lower this for sure. And that makes the deal make sense. So we subtract the seller note, boom. We deduct the investor's preferred $9,000, aka that 12% a year, leaving $157,000. We apply the investor's equity kicker, i.e. that 20% of what's left over, which is around $31,000 annually. The total goes to the investor preferred return. They get around $40,000 for the year. That leaves the remaining amount around $125,000 for you to decide how you want to break that down, aka $10,000 a month. So you see people online talking about how to make $10,000 a month. This is how you make $10,000 a month, and then 5 years, if you decide to refinance or sell that company, you take this month up to what, 30, 40,000. You know, it just depends on how you grow the business. Or you can cash out and get 5-6 million. This is up to you. So you would make more in that time period come from the sale if you grow it and scale it. So a lot of things to consider here that might not be considered as a deal is costs that might be associated with growing the business in terms of setting up investor campaigns, paid advertising, different trade shows, things of that nature. Maybe bring on a team that writes your government contracts and applies for that. So this total number could be reduced. Probably I would say for this investor, you have set up terms where it's like, I won't pay you back until we reach X dollar amount. And then after that, I can give you your preferred return. Or I don't give you your preferred return that first year. So instead of that $12,000 that first year, so leaving out that $9,000, I can give you this instead, which means that $9,000 right there can go straight into growing the business. And then over here, honestly, I would probably take out whatever is not the annual salary. So the annual salary might be like $75,000. I would take that remaining 50-something thousand that is, and I would go and reinvest that into business and hope it grow and scale. So that way this number can double the following year. Okay. Final breakdown leaves you with, like I said here, 10, 4, 6. So seller note, boom. Investor note, boom. Total debt, investor service, ching pong. Sorry, that was not meant to be how it may have sounded. That was just an animated sound. And the net cash flow left over is $125,000. Like I said, restructure your deal to make sure you're putting enough money, keeping enough money in the business. You don't want to be pocketing all this money and making your business go to shit. So yeah, there's that. And also a reminder that we did EBITDA, so we did take out $75,000, an initial example from that SDE of $375 to cover the cost for a certain type of manager, and remaining is for whatever you want to do. Boom. And that, my friends, is how you possibly could buy a $1.2 million commercial cleaning business using 0% APR credit cards. And if you're someone who is skeptical of this, honestly, I understand, but I want you to understand a thing too. This is not the only way, this is a way. Every single thing is negotiable, right? When it comes to buying a business, you can easily get a deal done with 0% out of pocket, $0 out of pocket. What you have to understand is how to get creative though. What does that mean, Gary? That means that you have to understand how you can structure a deal that makes it favorable for both parties, and you're able to do things like earnouts where you say, hey, if the company's revenue reaches this, say the company right here is 1 million, right? Let's say if by year 3 it doesn't reach 2.5, then I can only pay you a different number, or I will pay you 1.2 if the company reaches, that 2.5 marker, for instance, in 3 years. Things of that nature. So that's different ways you can get the deal done and structure in a way that's favorable to you. You can say, hey, based on you can do a seller finance deal where you say, hey, seller, if we get this deal done, then that first year, this is how I want to structure it. And then after this point, I want to do this, right? It's all negotiable. It's all depending on how you set up the deal. So just want to give you guys disclaimers again, reference everything in the description. I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. Follow the disclaimers in there, and that should cover everything. So if you guys like this, let me know if you want to see more videos like this. I'm working to improve the quality as well as the concepts and make everything flow better, so that way it makes more sense. And again, like I said, I'm starting a series breaking down different types of creative financing structures and different ways to do these type of deals, so that way it'll be easier for you to follow along, as well as understand how you can set up different types of deals. So that being said, I appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Have a good one. Deuces.